We have issues, life issues, Second Amendment rights, social justice. And Lord, we ask for courage. There are many verses that you give us in the New Testament, far too many for me to quote this morning, that exhort us to persevere, to finish the race, to hold strong. So, Lord, today, help us to finish this session strong, but more importantly, that we finish well. And above all, that the decisions that we make will be honorable to you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Senator Hilkeman. I recognize Senator Geist for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Join me as we say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
I call to order the 45th day of the 107th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
There are, Mr. President. On page 818, after line 4 insert, Senator M. Kavanaugh requested a point of order. The M. Kavanaugh requested point of order was not recognized by the chair. Additionally, on page 853, before line 2, insert amendment refile in journal. Senator Moorfeld refiled his amendment AM 2297, found on page 802, and withdrawn on page 812 to LB 773. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
I do, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations, chaired by Senator Stinner, reports Legislative Bill 1014 to general file with committee amendments. Additionally, your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 1011 to select file with E&R amendments. And Senator Hughes would introduce LR 343. That'll be laid over. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I have in my hand a yellow copy of the ARPA bill as proposed by the Appropriations Committee. We will be passing it out. There is lots and lots of detail as it relates to the ARPA and the decision-making that the appropriations went through. So the pages will be passing that out. I think ARPA may be scheduled for tomorrow. So that will give you an opportunity to take a look. If you have questions, ask any of the committee members or come back and ask me about any item that you have a question on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Mr. Clerk will now proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1013, introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor. It's a bill for an act relating to the Cash Reserve Fund. Provides and eliminates fund transfer provisions, repeals the original section, and declares an emergency. Bill was read for the first time on January 13 of this year and referred to the Appropriations Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are both committee amendments as well as a floor amendment from Senator Lathrop pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner, would you like to give a brief recap of the committee amendment, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, LB 1013 and AM 2001, which is actually the bill, contains recommendations by the Appropriations Committee as it relates to certain items in the cash reserve. One of the things that I have mentioned from time to time, the cash reserve is a dual purpose reserve. It serves certainly as an economic stabilizer for the state's budget, but it also serves as a one-time source of funding for different projects. And a list of those projects initiated, some by ARPA, some initiated by the governor, some initiated by the Appropriations Committee, are listed in your budget book. And with that, I would ask that you vote green. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Senator Lathrop, if you'd like to give us a brief recap of your Amendment 80.
Yes, I would, and thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good morning. I hope you had a good and restful weekend, and you're prepared for the week ahead. I have an amendment on this committee amendment for the purpose of discussing the Department of Corrections reform and related subjects. I have gone through on Wednesday and Thursday of last week, we spent a good deal of time going through sort of a statement of the problem, the process from CJI, the options that came out of that process, and I've gone through each of the 21 points. We have some more time to spend on the topic today. I look forward to talking to you more about those issues, and I will go on to my first opportunity to speak when that's available to me.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop, and you are next in the queue.
Colleagues, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I appreciate that some of you were on the floor and some of you were not on the floor. Maybe you left last week early to go home, or maybe you were in your office getting other work done. Perhaps you had your TV on. You might not have. I just want to kind of go back and do a little bit of a What are we talking about again, to refresh your recollection, or for those of you who were not here or not on the floor to hear my opportunities at the microphone over the last couple of session days. I think I'll go through a little bit what a statement of the issue, and then we can talk about the CJI process and talk a little bit about 920. So the reason I believe we find ourselves at a crisis, and it's not a surprise that we are in a crisis. This has been obviously coming toward us since the last time I served here. I stood on this floor and talked about overcrowding long before I was ever term limited, and here we are. We entered into an overcrowding emergency on July 1, 2020, almost 2 years ago. We are in an overcrowding emergency because we are beyond 140% of design capacity, and we amended the bill, I think in 2015, to require the governor to declare an emergency if we did not get below 140% of design capacity, or at any point in time when we're over that number. We're actually at 152 or 3% of design capacity. We have people sleeping at diagnostic and evaluation. They're at 355% of design capacity. And for those of you that don't know what D&E is, as it's generally called, Diagnostic and Evaluation Center, that's your first stop. So if you get sentenced to the Department of Corrections, the first place you're going to go to is D&E if you're a male. When you go to D&E, an evaluation is done. It's hard for them to do them in a timely fashion because there are so many people, and once it's done, they don't have a place to put them. So they put them in little cots on the floor in a common area of D&E. And as a consequence, we're at 355% of design capacity. What's that mean in terms of overcrowding? Because this is the most overcrowded facility. D&E literally has people sleeping on the floors. And when we were understaffed, we didn't even have enough people to guard them properly. And we're still understaffed. I'll talk about staffing at least once in my opportunity to speak, but the fact that we are at 152% of design capacity tells us that we are in an overcrowding crisis. And we don't solve that problem, colleagues, by building or improving our capacity by 700 beds. We would spend $270 million getting 700 beds and still be in an overcrowding emergency. It doesn't make sense. We have an issue that we need to fix. And it is not difficult to do this work.
1 minute.
Other states have done it. It has been led by conservatives. It is a conservative movement. President Trump was responsible for the First Step Act, far more aggressive than this bill. And when you hear people talk about, well, this is like the California thing, it's not. It's not. This is a relatively modest set of proposals that we're going to be talking about. It's not opening the gates of the Department of Corrections and letting inmates free that shouldn't be out. We are in an overcrowding emergency, and the only proposal to make or address that situation is LB 920, which contains the CJI options. We went through those options last week. I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Lathrop, for starting the conversation. And again, it was, I think, a long week last week, and we got to the end and we were talking about a lot of these things. And I think some people maybe could use a refresher, but one of the things Senator Lathrop had handed out a handout that showed the projections of the population without any sort of reform, and then against building the new prison. I was trying to find it here. I must have misplaced it, but essentially there was still a gap between our capacity on that with a new prison versus the projected population growth. And so the bottom line is, even if we build a new facility, it doesn't solve the projected population crunch that we have going forward unless we make some kind of reasonable reforms that will actually bend that curve and decrease the total number of people going into custody. And Senator Lathrop just talked about D&E, which is the Diagnostic and Evaluation Center, which is where people go their first entry into the Department of Corrections. And as he said, it's somewhere close to 300% over capacity. And there's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, the people they go there, they get evaluated and determine what level of custody they should be placed in, which facility they should go to. And then obviously the crowding in the other facilities backs up into D&E because people get sent to D&E from county facilities once they are sentenced. Some people do their entire sentence at D&E, particularly people doing shorter sentences on lower level offenses, class 3A, class 4 felonies, because what happens is they get arrested, they spend all of their pre-trial time in custody, which can be 6 months, and then they have a trial or they plead and they get sentenced. And on a class 4, if you get sentenced to the maximum, which is 2 years, and you've already done 6 months, you've got about 6 months more to do with good time, and you get to D&E, and by the time you get there, you have less than 6 months left, and you serve the entire sentence there, which means you're not getting into any programming, which is class 4 felonies, the types of people that drug offenses, low-level theft offenses, that we specifically want to get into some of that programming. But so that's what I wanted to talk about quickly, the number between operational capacity and average daily population. So our operational capacity, we are currently at 121% of operational capacity. Well, in the last census, which is again this NDCS quarterly population summary from the last quarter of last year, October to December of 2021. On that particular census, the operational capacity was 4,554 people, and our average daily population was 5,548. So just about 1,000 people over operational capacity, about 2,000 people over design capacity. And then if you go down to the page 2, you can see what the highest level, most serious offense for which people are in custody. And you have the homicides, sex offenses, assaults, robberies, weapons, restraint, and you get down drugs. 770 people are in custody of the Department of Corrections on drug-related offenses as their most serious offense, which means that is the offense for which that it's not that they had drugs on them and they were also convicted of a robbery, that they had drugs on them and they were also convicted of a weapons offense. Those are individuals who are only in on a drug-related offense or a drug-related offense and something less than that, which I don't have a suggestion of what that is. Thank you, Mr. President. And then theft offenses, 235 individuals in on theft offenses, which of course includes third offense shopliftings and other property-related thefts. That's about 1,000 individuals are in custody on those 2 offenses alone as their most serious offense. So those are not crimes of violence. Those are not crimes against individuals. While a theft offense is against an individual, but it's not an act against, a physical act against someone. And so when we're talking about reasonable reforms that can help us alleviate the population, addressing some of those level of offenses that are putting people into custody, that are potentially spending all their time at D&E, is a reasonable action we can take to help alleviate the growing population in our prisons and to help alleviate the problems we have with getting people services when they're in custody.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would yield any time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 453.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Blood. I want to go back to that handout that I gave you, for those of you that see me. The one with the lines where we started this conversation middle of last week, which is a graph that shows the actual population and our projected population. The dashed line represents the JFA projections. The JFA projections, that's a for real group. They were brought in by the Department of Corrections, and Director Frakes, in some questions in front of Judiciary Committee, acknowledged that that's still an accurate projection of our prison population. And you will see that red line, which is the one I'm going to talk about for a little bit. That red line represents operational capacity. Operational capacity, by definition, and I say definition in our statute, is 125% of design capacity. Design capacity is the blue line. For a long time, you will see that the red and the blue line are flat, while the black line is moving upward. Those are what I'll call the Heinemann years, when we added no capacity to the Department of Corrections. And after the line stops being flat and starts moving upward, those would be the Rickett years, when the governor proposed and this body appropriated money for additional capacity. Each one of those lines, that as the line moves up, each one of those is us adding additional capacity. And the last lurch in that red line represents the addition of 700 more beds with the governor's proposed prison and closing the Department of Corrections. Now what I'd want to do is take a moment to talk to you about what we've spent making those lines go up. And if you look at this chart, the one thing that strikes me, and perhaps you, is it looks like we're chasing the black line with the red line. In other words, we're trying to build our way to the black line and make that red line go up and intersect the population or the population projection by trying to build our way out of this. And I want to tell you what we've spent trying to do that. In 2019, we added capacity to the Community Correction Center, Men's Community Correction Center in Lincoln. That added 100 beds and cost us $1.5 million. And it added $250,000 to our operational expenses. In other words, you got to hire people to man these places, right? The second line it represents additional capacity at the Community Correction Center in Lincoln for women. We added 160 beds at the cost of $17 million and an increase in our operational expenses of $1.8 million. In 2020, we also added 100 beds, minimum custody beds, to NSP. Those 100 beds cost us $5.8 million, and the increase in our operational expenses were $665,000. In 2022, we will have two projects completed.
1 minute.
One is the RTC critical healthcare beds. That will come at an expense of $75 million. It will add 64 beds and cost us $3.5 million a year in operational expenses. And we will have the 384 beds also on the Lincoln Correction Center campus, high security beds. This place appropriated the money. Did you say time? 384 beds at the cost of $49 million, and it will add to our operation expenses $3.7 million. In total, the cost to raise those lines before we get to the proposed prison, $148,500,000, with an addition annual
Time, Senator.
operating expenses of $10 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator McCollister, you're recognized.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good to be with you on this rainy Tuesday morning. Senator Lathrop made the point that many states have undergone the CGI process. In fact, that's true. A fact sheet from Pew dated July of 2018 indicated that 35 states have reformed their sentencing and correction policies through the Justice Reinvestment Institute, a public-private partnership that includes U.S. Department of Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Council of State Governments, the Justice Center, and the Crime and Justice Institute, and other organizations. Although reforms vary from state to state, all aim to improve public safety and control taxpayer costs by prioritizing prison space for people convicted of serious offenses and investing some of the savings in alternatives to incarceration that are effective at reducing recidivism. Some states have even engaged in more than one reform effort. Justice reinvestment policies generally fall into four categories: sentencing laws that instruct courts on how to sanction convicted defendants, release laws that determine the conditions for inmates' departure from prison, and supervision laws that guide how those probation parolees are monitored, and oversight laws that track the progress of these charges. In the years since the wave of reforms began, the total imprisonment rate has dropped, get this, 11%, while crime rates have continued their long-term decline. That is sure true in Nebraska. In 1980, we had 1,400 in our prison system. And now, 42 years later, what do we have? We have 156% of our people in prison, and we have a serious overcrowding situation, worst in the country. Other states have engaged in this very process. How about Louisiana? Certainly not a liberal state. 2 years ago, Louisiana adopted landmark criminal justice reforms that have safely reduced the state's correctional population. The bipartisan policy changes received widespread support, earning endorsements from a diverse coalition that included the state's District Attorney Association, that sounds good, business and faith leaders, and community advocates. Along with the report released in July, the state announced savings attributed to the reforms of $17.8 million for fiscal year 2019. By statute, 70% or $12.4 million will be reinvested in state corrections initiatives and local programs that aim to reduce reoffending or support crime victims. The remaining 30% or $5 million will be returned to the state general fund. Isn't that great? We can actually save money, send money back to the general fund by enacting some of these changes. Continuing, these reinvestments followed the $12.2 million in savings from the first year that reforms began to be implemented. The state reinvested $8.54 million of that amount in victim services, community incentive grants, and strategic investments for the Department of Corrections. Among the $1.25 million in victim services disbursements, $750,000 went to establishing what is known as the Family Justice Center in Baton Rouge to offer resources, services, and a safe environment to victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's Louisiana. We also see Ohio has undergone this very same process, and they've saved money. So I think we need to recognize that this is not a left-wing conspiracy, that criminal justice reform time has come to Nebraska, and we need to move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCollister. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I want to take up where Senator McCollister just left off. So you've heard me for 3 days now describe the problem that we're in an overcrowding emergency. That was declared by the governor. This problem is longstanding, and we've been kicking the can down the road. You've heard that we brought CJI in. You've seen that we've tried to build our way out of this over the last 8 years. We've spent $150 million, and we've increased our operation expenses by $10 million, adding capacity, or we will by this summer when these other two places open up. And Senator McAllister just made a really good point, and I hope you were listening, that other states that have done this have solved the overcrowding or the growth in their prison population. They have saved money, and they have not sacrificed public safety. I struggle in this body with this challenge. I can put facts in front of you. I can give you data that shows the problem. I can give you a data-driven set of policies that provide a solution. Those same data-driven policies that provide a solution save us money. They solve the problem, and they do not impact public safety. One of our first responsibilities as senators here is public safety. And when CJI came into Nebraska, I said in a press conference with the governor that public safety would be our North Star in this process. We are not going to do anything that would sacrifice public safety. I have data, okay? I have data. I can talk to you about any one of these proposals, why they are supported by the data, and how they do not sacrifice public safety. And I'm up against talking points. I'm up against rhetoric and talking points. And this morning, before we get to noon and go to cloture, I'm going to talk about that data, and I'm going to begin by taking you back to the process. I don't have to explain to you why we brought CJI in. We are in an overcrowding emergency, and we're at 153% of design capacity. We have a problem. CJI was brought in. By the way, they've been in many other states. CJI was brought in at the invitation of all three branches of government. Senator Hilgers and I signed a letter on behalf of the legislature. The governor signed on, and the Chief Justice signed on. The CJI process is generally referred to criminal justice reinvestment. And I think we should take a moment to pause and talk about what justice reinvestment means.
1 minute.
It has a purpose. It is to examine your corrections population, your criminal justice system, and determine what you can do to sentences, to your sentencing structure, who goes to prison, how long they stay, and how soon are they released. You make reforms under the Justice Reinvestment Initiative process, and you take those savings and invest them in more effective ways to reduce crime in your community. That can be programming. It can be substance abuse treatment. But by definition, we are going to look at sentences, change some sentences, and who gets sentenced and for how long, and take the savings from that process and invest it in other ways. You look like you're about to say time.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I appreciate what Senator Lathrop was just saying about the idea here is about investment, and it's not about an attempt to be more lenient. It's not an attempt, and it would certainly, we're not making any suggestions, would make Nebraskans less safe. The objective here is to find what our goal is, which is decreasing crime, and looking at proven projects, programs that have worked in other states to decrease recidivism, improve outcomes for individuals who have been incarcerated, decrease crime overall through that type of investment, through investing in things like programming, drug and alcohol treatment, mental health treatment, finding out, getting to the root cause of some of these crimes. We're not going to be able, through programming alone, you're not going to be able to solve all these problems. But through locking people up, you're not going to be able to solve all the problems either. And if you only pick this one path where we incarcerate people at higher and higher numbers, we are going to continue to increase the cost of that incarceration and get a diminishing return on that investment, and the cost is going to increase. I wanted to talk about briefly one portion of what's suggested in LB 920, which is this creating a space in which people are going to have more parole eligibility. And we've talked about this a lot of times, but it is a confusing subject matter. So I'll try to give you a concrete example. So an individual is sentenced to a term of years for an offense of, say, a 2A felony. So a 2A felony carries a potential penalty range of 0 to 20 years. And the judge can impose a sentence of anywhere in that range. And currently, the judge could impose a sentence of 19 to 20 years. The 19-year sentence gets cut in half with good time to, 9.5 years, I guess. And the other sentence, the 20 years, gets cut in half to 10 years, which means that the 19-year is a parole eligibility window time. So after serving that sentence, the person is eligible to get placed on parole. They're not guaranteed parole. They get an opportunity to go in front of the parole board, but many times those first attempts are denied. But they have to be parole eligible based on time, and then they have to demonstrate their eligibility through successfully completing programming and good behavior. So that when we have those sentences that have a very small parole eligibility window, we don't create an incentive for someone to fully take advantage of the programming in the facility, within the Department of Corrections. And we don't have a time in which they are on supervision in the community, because what parole is the time in which somebody is still under supervision. So under the suggestion, the Bill 920 has a sentence could not be a 19 to 20. The sentence would be something like a 10 to 20, meaning that a person would have a parole eligibility date after 5 years, after they've served 5 years of their sentence and completed their programming and done the things they need to do to be granted parole. And then once they are on parole, so if they get parole at the first eligibility date, which is 5 years, their remaining of time in their sentence, which is that 20-year number cut in half to 10, is another 5 years. They would be on parole. They'd be on supervision by the Department of Parole for 5 years. So they are not completely free from the supervision and constraints of the Department of Corrections. They would still have to check in. They still have to go to meetings. They still have to do whatever programming is asked of them. And as I've talked about many times, they are subject to being returned to the Department of Corrections to custody if they screw up, if they have a new law violation, and in many cases, if they have a technical violation. And so that change is one that just gives the potential for parole supervised release, which is a program that has shown benefits, that gets people incentivized to take advantage of the programming within the Department of Corrections, and gets more people into programming once they get out, as opposed to just coming straight out of custody and into the community without any step down in supervision, without any requirement that they take classes or go to programming. And those type of step down in supervision does help decrease recidivism, does help get better outcomes, which are the things that we want out of our corrections system. And so this is one of those.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Stinner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I am obviously for LB 1013 and the attached amendment, and Senator Lathrop obviously is presented us with another floor amendment, but I will be opposed to that. But really what I wanted to talk about today is to call your attention to the change that we did to the general fund financial status. And if you want to look at your green sheets, what you have is another column in the financial status. And it is the zero rate that I had talked about in our briefing as it relates to our tax bill that's coming up. So based on a zero rate, if you look across in the out year, there's a positive $64 million. And the governor had asked me what number is appropriate for tax legislation. And so I did that calculation based on a zero rate. But I also indicated at that time that we would have a cash reserve more than the 16%, certainly $300 to $400 million over that. I actually was at $400 million over that as an added buffer and an added protection as you move out over the 3-year period of time to get the tax relief. So that was a indication on my part that numerically we could make this work and it makes some sense to do. The second thing that I also indicated was I want to have safeguards. There has to be some way as we go out, especially on real estate, that we don't get ourselves into a fiscal bind based on spikes in assessed valuations. That was put in place actually in 1107. We demanded that a 5% cap be there. We think we can handle a 5% cap because the growth of revenue nominally is about a 5% rate, but we can't handle a 10% rate increase, which I do have a schedule that shows several years where we were above 10%. That 10%, if we were at $1 billion, is $100 million in the first year of the biennium and $100 million in the second year of the biennium. It's $200 million impact. So I would like to have that safeguard put in place. The other stress test that you have to go through as you look out over the future and you're doing something as it relates to revenue is what happens if you have a revenue shortfall. And I can just point to the 13.5% and the 10.5% that we have as a revenue spikes. And those were due to stimulus. That is the highest rate ever to the third highest rate ever. So that's what we're living on right now. That's how we rebuilt the cash reserve. That's how we're spending some of that down as one-time expenditures. But if it could go up, I can tell you that it can also go down. So one would have to say that if revenue actually does go down 10%, so you're at $6 billion up here, and all of a sudden you hit a downdraft, and you got 10% decline, you're at $5.4 billion. That's what you have to protect yourself with. That is the circuit breaker that we need to have that says if we get a downdraft, everything is put on hold till we restore that revenue back up. Those are the two extreme cases that we're trying to protect ourselves. Now, everything based on the numbers that I see, based on where inflation's at and all the rest of that, I think that the plan will work as designed, but my fears are as we go out for 20, 30, 40 years and not put in safeguards, we're asking for a big, big problem. And I think as senators, we have to look out over the future, understand what we've done, and certainly protect the fiscal stature of this state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sinner. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to add to what Chairman Sinner has been discussing. My office on Monday went through and compiled, and frankly, we just stopped when we got to 7 billion. We compiled and added up all of the requests that have a price tag on them that this body has brought this year. and we just stopped at $7 billion. $7 billion was brought before this legislature to spend. This whole weekend, I have been concerned in thinking through the fact that we are making decisions this week and next that could potentially set our state up for the future legislature walking in to the situation that I know all too well my freshman year, where we are $1 billion in the hole. Colleagues, we are having an international crisis right now. There is a war going on, and the countries that are at war are some of the largest exporters of fertilizer. I don't think people realize that the United States is a net importer of fertilizer. We cannot stand on our own 2 feet in terms of our capabilities right now of producing one of the most critical products for feeding the world. And the decisions we're making right now with our budget are very concerning to me when we're looking into the future at a global crisis that's going to last for many years in terms of critical supply chain needs that we are not self-reliant in terms of producing in this country and are going to hit farmers harder than anyone else. We should absolutely be leaving this session with a healthy cash reserve. And when I'm looking at our cash reserve, I'll tell you the way that I look at it, because it's the same way I look at my savings account. Sure, we have $1.4 billion in the cash reserve. That's not unobligated, colleagues. We just passed a bill that says the legislature shall build a canal. So take $500 million out of there right away. That doesn't count. $500 million is obligated out of that cash reserve. So minus that, you had about $900 million. Add $300 million that we've obligated for the next project. That bill's coming due at some point. So minus $300 million out of the $900 million. This is what we're making decisions on right now. And when I look at the other requests that are coming out of the cash reserve, that adds on to it. All of a sudden, what may look like $1.4 billion in our cash reserve is obligated down to a couple $100 million. And then we wash our hands of it and we walk away and we say, good luck to the next legislature. If you all recall, the reason we didn't have to raise significant amount of taxes our freshman year when we had $1 billion revenue shortfall
1 minute.
was because of our cash reserve. And we are on the precipice right now as a body of making decisions that obligate that cash reserve down to a couple $100 million. And those bills come due. We've committed to them. So these next 2 weeks, we have to make decisions, and they're tough decisions. They're ones that our Appropriations Committee makes all the time. Do I like everything that's in this budget? No, I don't. But I'm one member, and we're all compromising on this. And in the end, what matters more than anything is the fiscal stability of our state as we're looking at an international crisis going on right now. And I believe, thank goodness it's raining, but also I believe a significant portion of our state's also in a drought.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of FA 80 by Senator Lathrop, and I rise again to continue the discussion that we took up last week on criminal justice in this state. And, you know, I just hope that, we all understand that we could vote to build a prison today, which would take a substantial amount of time, but our prisons would still be overcrowded. So, in all honesty, I think all parties, all sides need to come to the table and figure this out, because regardless of you support the prisoner or not, and if we care about being humane and humanity, we have to do something about our overcrowding crisis. We can't just point the finger to Russia in Europe and say Vladimir Putin is inhumane and he's a horrible person. If we elect to do nothing, we're pretty much the same people, because our prisons are overcrowded. They're inhumane. Something needs to be done. Medical needs are not being met. All these things are not being met. So we could either be hypocrites or we could do something. And that's just the bottom line about this. There's many individuals inside of our prisons that, you know, in my opinion, I think they've took the steps to show that they deserve a second chance. When a lot of y'all should go inside of our prisons and meet with the Circle of Concerned Lifers or the Community Action Program and things like that, and really understand where those individuals are coming from. And they're all remorseful and have taken on the, you know, accountability portion that a lot of people talk about. They know they're not perfect, but what they have been doing since they've had the time to be inside, they have all, not all, but a good portion of them have decided to chart a positive path, and not only for themselves, but for the rest of those individuals inside. And just to say you're a horrible person, I don't agree with that. Stand up and say, either you're for second chances or you're not. There's some people that the one time they made a mistake in life, they ended up in prison. So does that person not deserve a second chance? Is some people in there that went to jail when they were not even 18 or barely 16. Does that person not deserve a second chance? And you could be tough on crime. We're not going to let a lot of horrible people out, and all this rhetoric that, you know, is just political talking points at this point, because you're obviously ignoring the data. You're obviously ignoring the rest of this nation. You're obviously ignoring, you know, bipartisan support to, you know, change the trajectory of our criminal justice system in this country. So either we're going to be hypocrites or we're going to actually do something meaningful this session. But I'll just tell you, if your starting point is just building a prison to get out of this, I just would like to tell you that don't stand up and say Vladimir Putin is a horrible person and he's inhumane. We're all going to be inhumane and horrible people if we don't elect to do something about our criminal justice system. So we either are hypocrites or we're going to do the right thing this session. And if you oppose 920, bring some good faith amendments that actually don't take away completely from the bill, but are in good faith. If you're just dropping amendments just because the police or the county attorneys want you to, that's not good faith, because they're not talking to Senator Lathrop and they haven't talked to me. So let's have a real conversation about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. To those of you who have been saying, either on the microphone or in private, that the issue of a new prison and sentencing reform are separate questions, what we do about the overcrowding crisis and the new prison are separate questions, I ask you, what are we going to do about our overcrowding crisis? If you say they're separate questions, does that mean that you say we should do something about this prison issue but not the overcrowding crisis? What is the solution to our overcrowding crisis? Sticking our heads in the sand and pretending it's not happening isn't working. It's getting worse. We've been asking this question for a number of years now, and we're not getting any answers. We continue to ask the question. It's like we're mute and no one hears us. What is the plan? How do we make any headway at all on our prison overcrowding crisis? Look, if you're someone who thinks it's okay to put folks who are sentenced into an overcrowding situation because they deserve it. I hear that a lot. I hear people say, I don't care about overcrowding because the folks in prison deserve it. They deserve these conditions. It's part of their punishment to be treated as inhumanely as possible. We don't care. They have it too easy as it is. Some people have said that to me. And I'm here to tell you that even if you think that, even if you think that any violation of the criminal code, well, except the ones that maybe you do, like speeding or jaywalking or something like that, but the other people's violations of the criminal code. If you think that anybody who commits one of those violations needs to be treated as inhumanely as possible, I'm telling you right now, you should still care about the overcrowding crisis. If you care about public safety, you should care about the prison overcrowding crisis. If you care about the working conditions for men and women who feel called to do a very difficult job, but do it anyway, despite being mandatory overtime 3 or 4 times a week for many years. If you care about those working men and women, you care about prison overcrowding. If you care about sending people out of prison better than they came into prison, then you care about the prison overcrowding crisis. And yes, if you care about being tough on crime, then yes, you still care about the prison overcrowding crisis, because sending folks to sit out in this overcrowded prison for a number of months or years without any programming is not tough on crime.
1 minute.
In fact, what that does is it helps encourage crime. We are making them better criminals when we put them into an overcrowded situation where they are not having any incentive to get out of prison by doing their programming. They have no incentive for paroling when they have flat sentences. You've heard that from us time and time again. That is not tough on crime. Tough on crime is wanting to change the crime, eliminate the crime, get rid of the crime. Being tough on crime means making people commit less crimes. The way we make people commit less crimes is we give them an incentive to rehabilitate themselves. We teach them how to be better people. We get them to stop committing crimes by showing them the way how to do that. And if we are at 355% of capacity.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator McCollister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. With no vision, the people perish, says that in the good book. And that's the message from Senator DeBoer. And we have no plan. I think we need a plan if we are going to deal with this prison overcrowding issue. I was so hopeful when the 3 branches of government came together, engaged CGAI, to go through this process and figure out ways that we can maintain public safety at reduced costs. A win-win proposition, but it still hasn't happened. And then we have a governor that's in the newspaper casting dispersions on the process. We really need to move this process forward so we can maintain public safety and reduce costs. We have to recognize that 95% of the people will be coming out of our prison system. They are a human resource that we can tap and utilize. We need them in Nebraska with 1.8% unemployment and 60,000 jobs that need to be filled. Also, we can save money. When it costs $50,000 to put somebody in our prison system, high security prison system, we can do that far better with less restrictive and less costly ways to deal with some of the issues that people, some of the crimes people have committed. And this is not rocket science. Indeed not. 35 other states in the country have gone through this process, and they have in fact showed that you can maintain safety and reduce cost. So we really need to go full speed ahead on this process. I was attracted to the First Step Act that was done through the federal system. Of course, this is Justice Reinvestment Nebraska. First Step Act reduced the size of the federal prison system population while maintaining public safety. The initiative intent was to reduce recidivism, improve public safety, shift resources to more cost-effective solutions. That's a good thing. What are some of the ideas that they're proposing? Limit the use of consecutive sentencing, stacking. Reduced mandatory consecutive sentences for multiple firearm convictions by eliminating a stacking provision which previously resulted in 25-year mandatory minimum. 25-year mandatory minimum. LB 920 limits the use of discretionary consecutive sentences to cases in which aggravating factors are present. Doesn't that make sense, colleagues? Increased release opportunities for an aging population. Senator McKinney and I talked about this last week. Does it really make any sense to put some 60-year-old person that's been in jail for 40 years for a crime and who isn't a public risk anymore? Makes no sense to me. Expand Bureau of Prison early release pilot program to more facilities and increased eligibility for people 60 plus to be placed in home confinement upon serving 2/3 of their sentence. LB 920 creates a parole release opportunity for people 70 plus who have served at least 10 years of their sentence. Finally, reduce mandatory minimum sentences and limit incarceration for drug offenses. Expand safety valve, allowing judges to depart from mandatory minimums for low-level, nonviolent drug convictions when there are minor criminal records. Time?
1 minute.
Thank you. Reduce the length of mandatory minimums for certain drug offenses and modify the types of prior convictions that lead to enhanced penalties. Finally, retroactively apply Fair Sentencing Act, allowing people incarcerated for certain drug possession offenses to petition for sentence reduction. These are the kinds of things we need to do in Nebraska. Smart justice, maintain public safety, and reduce costs, and all taxpayers should like that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCollister. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was kind of going through parts of 920 last time I was up, and I saw Senator Lathrop handed out this flyer handout that shows a few things. The second page shows the expected 920 expected to slow and nearly flatline prison growth. So the projection by I think 2030, I'm not sure, I guess. The out projection is 7,327 individuals without 920 and 6,232 with 920, which is more than 1,000 people that we're no longer incarcerating. And it has the savings of $10 million annually, which is really probably an underestimation, including the cost of building a new prison. The one thing so I was looking here at 920 and listening to Senator McAllister talk about the suggestions, and I've talked a little bit about parole, and I was talking about the parole eligibility date change last time, which is of course when somebody is sentenced to a range of years, say at 10 to 20, their parole eligibility is after they serve their 10-year sentence, which with good time is half of that, so 5 years. And then they are on supervision for the remaining 5 years of that sentence. And so they're still on supervision. They have to go through programming. They have to stay out of trouble. They have to stay in contact with their parole officer. And then we have people who, when they're on parole, a number of them being returned to custody for technical violations. And I've talked about this a couple of times where we've had about 50% of the parole people returning to custody as a result of a parole violation are as a result of technical violations and not necessarily new law violations. And I bring that up again because if you look at 920, I think it's actually AM 2286, on page 55, there's this part that talking about creating a pilot program to establish technical parole violation residential housing program. The purpose of this program is to provide accountability and intensive support for individuals on parole who commit technical violations without revoking them fully back to prison. The pilot program shall provide a structured environment for selected individuals on parole who have committed technical violations. The purpose shall be based upon a therapeutic community model. Participants in the program shall, at a minimum, be required to take part in counseling, educational, and other programs as the department deems appropriate, to provide community services, and to submit to drug and alcohol screening. An individual on parole shall not be placed in the pilot program until the Division of Parole Supervision has determined the individual is suitable candidate in accordance with policies and guidelines developed by the division. Basically, what this is saying is this is a program, a pilot program, that will help solve this problem of these individuals being sent back to prison for technical violations. So it's a stepped up approach, meaning that once somebody's out in the community, they are out, they have their own place to live usually, and can make some of their own decisions, though still under the obligations and requirements of the supervision of parole. But if they have a technical violation, which again can be a failed drug test, which is they test positive for a controlled substance, have a relapse, or they miss a meeting, or they're not keeping up with their programming, that's a technical violation that then they, rather than send them back to the prison, they get required to go to this transitional housing program and
1 minute.
have more rigorous supervision, which of course then gets them actually taking advantage of the programming we want them to take advantage of, making progress still, and not upsetting the progress they've made in terms of getting a job, reconnecting with their family and their community. So this is a step in the right direction to cut down on the people we're sending back, which is about 20 to 30 a month of individuals that are being sent back to the Department of Corrections for technical violations of their parole. So 920 would increase people eligible for parole and increase the supervision for individuals on parole in a number of ways, which gets us better outcomes, gets us closer to what we actually think the criminal justice system should do, which is help people decrease recidivism, decrease crime, and get better outcomes for our society at a lower cost overall. Saves us money, gets better outcomes. That's what we're going for here. And that should be the objective.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. What a wonderful day. I wasn't gonna even talk today until later on today, but I started reading the ARPA budget. I know we're gonna spend a lot of time on that. And then I started hearing about healthy cash reserves and making sure we don't transfer a lot of money. But I just wanna remind everybody, out of the 500 million cash transfers, none of it went to Lincoln or Omaha. Over $300 million for trails, lakes, and recreational water and golf courses. But here's what really got me today, because the paper reported and everybody kind of, I think, misled the body on what the Appropriations Committee did for ARPA. If you read section 37, page 28, we thought North and South Omaha was getting 150 million, at least that's what I was told. But if you read the real language, the distribution is 50 million to qualified census tracts in a metropolitan class north of Dodge Street, no less than 50 million to South Omaha, and then up to 50 million in the rest of the state. One, that wasn't my bill, so the committee expanded on that bill when it came to urban, but every rural bill, the committee did not expand on to include urban. But what kind of disappoints me the most is I continue to be lied to about what's going on with this. And I'm using the word lie, because reporters were told last week North Omaha was getting up to, North and South Omaha were getting up to, or we're going to get 210. That's just not true. It's not true. And now I'm going to spend a little time talking about the split between East Omaha and directly South and North Omaha. To compare South and North Omaha to be the same is beyond disrespectful and borderline racist. To split them equally is borderline racist, if not racist at all. South Omaha has been historically working class white individuals. And in fact, McDonald, former Senator Scott Lautenbaugh, and I can go down the list, all were in South Omaha up until maybe the last 20 to 25 years. I would say 1998 probably is when the shift started to occur. To compare that to North Omaha, since the 60s, since the 50s, since redlining, is damn disrespectful. And for that to be signed off on tells me this committee, and I'm going to say it and people can get offended, and I don't care if we go to battle over this, the rest of these bills, that black people don't mean anything. That the struggles that we have went through in North Omaha are just the same as the qualified census tract in Hastings. Notice the language changed, media. It's no longer North and South Omaha. It's qualified census tracts across the whole state. We can get up here for the next 4 hours or however long and talk about prison reform and all that, but it doesn't matter unless the state invests in the communities that are overly populated in our prisons. And nothing in this budget and nothing in this appropriations ARPA bill tells me anything differently.
1 minute.
There are things in the ARPA bill that will give us a clawback provision. And I'm gonna start with the small business meat processors. We can have that conversation plenty of time tomorrow. Because you can't use overtime and extra expenses as your justification when they testified at the damn hearing they had record profits. That's no longer an impacted business or industry. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, if not filed by me. You can't say it's an impacted business when they testify at the hearing to record profits. It's not lost revenue, nor is it a small business impacted. What study was done for Hastings CTQ, or qualified census tract?
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know that we will be discussing ARPA tomorrow. But I will respond to some of the conversations that are going on today in terms of ARPA, since we've handed out the packet here. Colleagues, we have the opportunity to debate this tomorrow, and the speaker has been clear. If you want changes to occur in the ARPA package, then bring an amendment and make the changes. These are the suggestions that our Appropriations Committee went forward with, using a very fair model in which not every one of us in appropriations got what we wanted. But the reality is there's $4 billion worth of asks for ARPA and $1.4 billion to spend. So there are tough decisions to make. And everyone tomorrow is going to have to make them and recognize how tough it is when you want to fund something and it means you have to take it away from funding someone else. Our Appropriations Committee has done more for qualified census tracts in this ARPA bill than a lot of others across the country. When you add it all up together, affordable housing, money goes to economic development and qualified census tracts. Senator Wayne has an incredibly compelling argument, and frankly, he's one of the few senators who actually brought a bill that directly invests dollars in his community, and so he can make that argument. And if the rest of the body decides that they want to take the $150 million, 70 of which goes to the entire state, 40 of which goes to North Omaha, and 40 goes to South Omaha, if they want to take that 70 million and put it just in North Omaha, that's the conversation we have tomorrow. And people will have to articulate why somebody who lives in a poor community in other parts of the state is not going to be receiving ARPA. That's the conversation that will have to be had. In terms of our process, so you all understand how fair it was with the decision making, our chairman very specifically told us, after we have hearings that reflect the different sort of tranches of money that come through from the federal level, whether it deals with communities that were negatively economically impacted, public health, premium pay, water infrastructure. After every one of those series of hearings, he gave us a scorecard and he said, I don't want you talking to anyone else. I don't want you talking to lobbyists or even each other. I want you in the quiet of your office to go through and score how you think these ARPA funds should be utilized. There wasn't negotiations or deal making. This was done as fair as you could do it. And then what he did was said, if anything, get 7 or more members of the appropriations compelled to support this issue that the governor brought, then it meets the standard of us taking it up and deciding.
1 minute.
If it gets 6 or more appropriations committees that say, yes, this should be ARPA, then we take it up and we negotiate it. And that's what you have before you, colleagues. And now you get to decide. All of you get to decide. You get to bring amendments and say, no, I want more money for the North Omaha project. Here are the projects that I can clearly articulate will increase jobs and well-being in this community, and compel the legislature to make that decision. But it comes out of somewhere else. It comes out of somewhere else. And that's the tough decisions that everybody is going to have to make tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm back at Floor Amendment 80, Senator Lathrop's amendment. I want to talk about the fact that we continue to want to pay for a prison without ignoring how we got here. And yes, CJI came in, that gave us a lot of hope that people would look at how we got here so we don't keep making mistakes. You know, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that's what we're doing. I want to relate it to a Nebraska treasure that's here in our state. I hope you've all been to the Harold Edgerton Explore It Center that's in Aurora. And I got to know about it because our son did a National History Day project. They ended up winning a national award on Harold Edgerton and his high-speed photography and what he did for the war and for other parts of manufacturing. The value of Harold Edgerton is the fact that he produced high-speed photography, which let numerous entities, numerous businesses, the national government understand factory lines and assembly lines and be able to take high-speed photography that would capture any moment of the production of a widget, the Remington rifle, bombs and flash bombs at any single moment of either their detonation or anything that happened. Hopefully you've all seen the picture of the bullet piercing an apple in slow motion, and he's truly amazing, and that center is amazing. Well, what he added to our world and our country is an ability to look at the process, to stop the process anywhere on an assembly line and see where things are going wrong. That's what CJI has presented to us, an ability to look at the process and see what's been going wrong. We know we have overcrowding. We know the issue at the end. That's like when he worked with Remington, that people knew that the Remington wasn't shooting straight. So with his high-speed photography, they could figure out what was going wrong. Well, CJI is like that high-speed photography. It looks at every step of prison reform within the prisons to see what's going wrong. And what came out was sentencing reform and programming. We've continued to talk about sentencing reform and programming since day one that I came into the legislature 8 years ago. And now what we've learned from CJI, among others from the various other studies that we've had, is that it's simple math. We're just going to be looking at simple math. The admissions has gone down 21% since 2011. It's gone down 21%. On the other side of the equation, the prison population has gone up 21% since 2011. So the structure that we use is admissions plus time served equals the population of our corrections.
1 minute.
So admissions plus N, that's the unknown number, equals prison population. Well, if the admissions have gone down 21% since 2011, but the population has gone up 21% since 2011, what's the issue? The issue is sentencing reform, and I'll get into all those issues. We've been talking about them ever since we've started talking about this days ago. But the issue is what N equals. And N equals the amount of time served, and that is going up significantly and causing additional issues with our overcrowding process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator McCollister, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Senator Wayne talked about North Omaha on his time at the mic. And I had an opportunity on Saturday to tour North Omaha with Preston Love. It's a fascinating history of North Omaha. After the Civil War, countless numbers of Black citizens, new citizens, came to North Omaha and started businesses, had doctors, lawyers, full array of small businesses in North Omaha. And for the next 80 years, that was a thriving community. Full array of businesses, opportunities, and some cultural issues or cultural opportunities that were fantastic. But of course, that changed along about 1960 with the civil rights era, and a lot of the people that populated that area of North Omaha moved into other parts of the community. But so I'm anxious to hear Justin Wayne's, Senator Wayne's bill that will be coming up shortly. Senator Lathrop passed out Justice Reinvestment Crime Rates fact sheet. Fascinating, truly fascinating. From 1980 to 2019, national violent crimes dropped by 37%. In the same time frame, national property crime rates declined 61%. Once again, I remind you, in 1980, Nebraska had 1,400 people in our prison system. Now we have 5,500. And this is at a time when crime rates were dropping. We also talked about what other states are doing. Georgia, since enacting JRI in 2012, crime rate has decreased by 29%. Arrest rate has decreased by 12%. South Dakota, since enacting JRI in 2013, South Dakota, not a liberal state, crime rate has dropped 3%. Arrest rate has decreased by 19%. Utah, since enacting JRI in 2015, crime rates have decreased by 26%. Arrest rates have decreased by 19%. Oklahoma, since enacting JRI in 2017, crime rates have decreased by 2%. Arrest rates has decreased by 6%. So colleagues, once again, federalism works. We just simply need to look what other states have successfully done. Maintain public safety and reduce cost. And also doing a better job with those people that are incarcerated who have been convicted of a crime. They are a human resource that we need to better utilize. So, Mr. President, I yield the balance of my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. I'm going to get on the mic momentarily and talk about what the CJI options would do to our average daily population and talk a little bit about substance once again with respect to this process. I just want you to recall or keep in mind, colleagues, that the information that I'm going to provide is data that CJI teased out of different databases here. So when they came into Nebraska at the invitation of the governor and others, they went through corrections data, they went through the justice system, which is our district court filing system, they went through probation, parole, they looked at basically the last 10 years, and then they met with the group and shared that data. And that, again, is on the Judiciary Committee website if you want to look at it. If you're at home and you're listening, you can see the data that supports each one of the options that we'll be talking about. This is information, and the fact that we are in an overcrowding emergency, the fact that we have a crisis at the Department of Corrections, can no longer be in dispute.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. I provided you with 2 handouts. I want to walk you through one. So if you'll look at all that stack of things on your desk and find this one with a graph on the front of it, it's about 3 or 4 pages long. I want to talk to you about this handout. So I asked the folks at CJI to provide me with two sets of data. One set of data I'll call the projections with the status quo. And the status quo would be making only those things that we would refer to as consensus item changes. And I want to say this without being disparaging in the least, but recognizing that Senator Geist and I are have a different perspective on the way forward. The first page represents the amendment Senator Geist has filed to 920. The second page represents what kind of changes would we get out of 920 if we passed it. And I want to walk you through that. When they prepared this, I asked them to give Senator Geist's numbers the benefit of the doubt and use conservative numbers with respect to the projections on the second page, the 920 projections. So if you look at this graph, the blue line represents the JFA projections, right? Look on the back page. We've been through the JFA projections. You know what they are. That's our population on its way to 2030, right? That number's, if we don't do anything, is going to be 7,327 inmates. The red line represents the changes that are found in the amendment to 920 filed by Senator Geist. Those would be consensus items. I've generally referred to them as not affecting sentence length, things that are aspirational, expand problem-solving courts, things like that. Have assistant probation officers, those kind of things. They will, between now and 2030, have the effect of reducing our population, according to their projections, not mine, by 143. Okay? So that you see what we're talking about in terms of the alternatives. 143. So do they have an effect? They have an effect. It is nominal. By contrast, on page 2 of this handout, colleagues, you will see the expected change to the average daily population as projected and calculating in the effect of LB 920, or what I would call the CJI options, including changes to some sentence structures. It will have the effect of reducing our average daily population by nearly 1,000 inmates by 2030. And when you reduce the population, of course, you don't need to build that many more prison beds, because if we do nothing, we'll be needing 1,300 more beds, right? The next page shows the estimated costs avoided by passing 920 between now and 2030. So the calculation shows how many millions of dollars we save between now and 2030. And these costs are a conservative estimate, and they're not assuming we don't build the prison. These are the operational, or what I call the marginal costs of adding additional inmates. That number, according to the fiscal note, somewhere around 11,000. So if we divide the population by our budget, or our budget by our population, it's about 49,000. If you add one person, that's a hard cost of 11,000, right? Using that marginal increase in costs per inmate as a measure for what we will save in operational expenses by passing 920, you will see we'll save more than $10 million between now and 2030. Anybody getting that? We're saving money and we're not sacrificing public safety, and we're solving an important issue facing the state. The third page shows that by the end of 2030, did you say time?
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Still rising to talk about, multitude of issues. I was thinking when Senator Wayne said you couldn't compare South Omaha to North Omaha, I would agree. And the perfect example of this is just ride down North 24th Street and ride down South 24th Street. And if you need a picture. And also, thinking about this budget, unless something changes, we're able to amend it or whatever else. Pretty much it just says that 50 million is okay for North Omaha out of almost $2 billion that we have to work with this year. I just don't agree with that. I find it unacceptable, disrespectful, and a lot of other words. Everyone stands up and say we care about your community and we want to help and we want to do this and we want to do that. But when things are put on paper, it doesn't reflect those words at all. And for forever, my community has been fed up with lip service from all sides. Come election time, oh, we need people from North Omaha to vote. You know why people from North Omaha aren't necessarily opt to vote or whatever? It's because for forever, people have come in our community and promised roses and given us dead dandelions. All these promises and nothing. All these plans for years and nothing. And that's why we've asked for what we asked for, because it's time to do something meaningful. Nothing that just say, oh, we gave you something, you should be happy. No, we're not happy, because we need more than that. We need a lot more. I got a call the other day from a gentleman that's in prison and he's innocent, asking, hey man, you think that bill gonna pass to, give me a chance to have my day in court to make my case again? And I'm like, bro, I hope so. I hope, wise minds could understand that we have if you talk about public safety and we point fingers at Russia about inhumanity, is it humane to have a man sitting in prison who didn't do it, and we all know he didn't do it, but nobody wants to support the bill because you're scared of police and county attorneys? Is that humane? Stop being hypocrites. Public safety isn't locking up an innocent man for 20 plus years because you're scared of the county attorney is gonna do a mailer on you or something, or it's election year and you don't want bad publicity. I think it would be good publicity to even if he doesn't get free and the bill doesn't even allow it, it just gives him a chance, but no one cares. Just like it just seems like no one cares about my community. And this individual is from my community. But it's okay to support bills and proposals to invest almost $500 million into a prison. That's where y'all want people from North Omaha to go. That's your investment in the North Omaha, is a prison, not economics, not into people. Stop standing up and being hypocrites and saying we're concerned about public safety when we have an innocent man sitting in prison and we don't have the political will to pass a bill to give him a day in court. Stop standing up and saying we care about your community, but only offer us crumbs.
1 minute.
If you really care, show it, not in your words, but in your actions. And then I'll believe you. But right now, I don't have faith in this body to actually care about North Omaha, whether it's one, giving an innocent man a chance in court, also being open to passing some reforms to decrease our population, and the third, invest in dollars that are meant, if you read the guidelines, for communities like North Omaha. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I really can understand what Senator McKinney's saying, and I appreciate his perspective. He's very wise in so much of what he says. I also want to go back a little bit to my discussion about one of our Nebraska heroes, Harold Edgerton. Again, they have the Harold Edgerton Explore It Center. You should be visiting that if you haven't, in Aurora. And he was one of the heroes that they credit with ending World War II. Does anyone know that? I hope you do. He created this high-speed flash photography, and because of that, they were able to create flash bombs. And the flash bombs that worked before would not trigger a picture, so they didn't have an understanding. Those flash bombs were used to figure out where troops were. Well, Harold Edgerton was able to connect the photography to the flash. And so what happened is they flew over Normandy, and they found out, because of Harold Edgerton, where the Germans were, so that they could come and attack Normandy. He's a true American hero, but a great part of what he did helped us understand the process in so many different things. You know, if we were having the overcrowding crisis and we're doing everything possible, such as programming, sentencing reform, all the things that Texas has done, I'd be totally in favor of building a new prison. If we could know that we are dealing with justice in the best way possible, fairly, equitably, making sure that our sentences were fair and reasonable, then I'd be totally in favor of building the new prison. But this is like saying, okay, I think Senator McKinney mentioned dandelions. You have a bunch of dandelions on your property, and so instead of putting fertilizer on them or weed killer, you just buy new property. That doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense to build a new prison without dealing with the underlying problems. And the underlying problems include sentencing reform, mandatory minimums, indeterminate sentences. We've talked about all of those things. And being able to get people out and supervised rather than having them jam out. Because when they jam out, they are way more likely to recidivate and to come back into the system and, of course, add to the population. CJI has given us some methods to look at the causes of this overpopulation. But rather than looking at the causes, we want to put on our blinders and say, we're just going to build a prison. That's that. To heck with what's happening. Too bad for the taxpayers, because we're going to make these decisions irrespective of the fact that this increases property taxes to continue to build prisons and not deal with the underlying issues. So for the people that are really concerned about property taxes, you should be calling your senators and saying, why are we doing this in a way that makes no sense, that costs more, that a conservative state like Texas is not doing? But I guess I think we must believe that we have way worse people here than in Texas.
1 minute.
We have way higher crime rates that should be dealt with in much more stringent and a longer method without programming. Let's do the work to make sure that the people that come back into our communities are safer people to come back into our communities, that they aren't just tossed away, that they jam out and then come out without the programming that they need. This is foolish. This is a waste of tax dollars to do it this way. Let's get the programming, the sentencing reform, and then build the prison if we need. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Penzing Brooks. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kavanaugh, thank you for the time. I had a chart here and I loaned it to a media guy, and now I'm standing here without it. But I want to go back to, yes, thank you. I want to go back to the second to the last page of that handout I was talking about. So by the end of 2030, LB 920 is estimated to avoid more than 55 million in cumulative costs to corrections. Colleagues, we're in an overcrowding emergency. We are at 153% of design capacity. We cannot build our way out of this. The 150 million we've spent on more capacity hasn't made a difference, hasn't made a dent in our overcrowding emergency. We must address overcrowding, and it makes no sense to build a new prison before we have figured out what the trajectory is or the growth rate of our prison. The process from CJI was data-driven. It's not people shooting from the hip. It's not people making stuff up. It's not rhetoric. It's not campaign stuff. It's data from people, 3 branches of government invited into this state to help us solve an overcrowding problem. The data demonstrates what effect those options would have on our population, the money we would save, and take a look at the other handout I gave you. Which is also missing. But if you saw my desk, it's covered in paper. And one of the handouts that I provided you, I'm going to borrow that, Senator McAllister, is this one entitled Justice Reinvestment and Crime Rate Fact Sheet. So you may have heard this characterized as something that will increase crime rates, make the communities less safe. So we have a problem, we have a solution, we have a way to save money, and the last argument you'll hear is crime rates are going to go up if we pass 920. Well, take a look at this data, because these guys have been in conservative states and done projects like this in conservative states. And what has happened as a result? Nationally, crime rates have declined over the last 40 years. From 1980 to 2019, national violent crime rates have declined by 37%. In the same time frame, national property crime rates declined by 61%. This decline has been attributed to improved technology for the police and strategies, personal security habits, demographic shifts, changes in drug markets and increased access to treatment and services in communities, incarceration, which researchers have found is responsible between 6 to 25% of the crime decline. The national crime decline continued into the first half of 2020. However, the trend began to shift upward after COVID-19 pandemic hit the second part of that year. The recent spikes across the nation for both property and violent crime can be attributed to a number of factors, including changes in law enforcement practices, increased homicides, other consequences of public health crisis the nation has experienced. JRA states, Justice Reinvestment states, Georgia, since enacting their JRI reforms in 2012, crime rate has decreased 29%, arrest rates by 12%. South Dakota, crime rate is decreased by 3%, arrest rates decreased by 19%. Utah, passing JRA in 2015, crime rate decreased by 26%, arrest rates decreased by 19%. Oklahoma, passed JRI in 2017, crime rate decreased by 2%, arrest rates decreased by 6%. The individual state data is attached to that sheet. There is only one bill that has been offered that will make a difference. Did you say time?
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Wishart, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to turn your attention again to the green sheet. And I do encourage all of you in the morning when you're looking at the agenda to also look at this green sheet, because it gives you a picture of where we are fiscally after the votes that we have on different pieces of legislation. To walk you through our process again from an appropriations perspective, we chose as a committee this year to look at everything holistically. We have $4 billion worth of asks when it comes to ARPA. This is a deficit budget. It's not our mainline budget. We passed that last year. So typically with deficit budgets, then we, generally speaking, don't do a lot of new initiatives. Those are passed last year in our biennial budget. And so for the deficit, what we chose as a committee, since we're doing a lot of work in ARPA and allocating those federal dollars this year, that as a committee, we would put forward to the floor in terms of general fund appropriations, a very skinny budget, leaving over $400 million for the floor, for this legislative body to decide in terms of general funds, what we want to use those funds for. Do you want to use the $400 million for revenue cuts? Do you want to use part of the $400 million for the North Omaha project? Do you want to use the $400 million for other general fund obligations and needs of the state? $400 million, colleagues. I haven't done specifically the analysis on this, but I've talked with some other appropriations committee members. And if I were a betting person, I would bet that we left as an appropriations committee more money for the floor than the last 20 years of appropriations committee combined in terms of how much we left to the floor. I think one of the issues going on is the fact that many of us came into this our legislative careers as freshman senators in a massive revenue shortfall. And what that means is for the past 4 years, we've hardly passed anything in terms of general fund obligations. Any bill that had a fiscal note, we call it death by fiscal note, it couldn't get past final reading. I mean, we have been working on such a tight budget that I think it's easy to forget that what we do in the Appropriations Committee is our baseline budget. And this body has the ability to pass legislation out of other committees and spend general funds money. And we left over $400 million this year to do that. If you have issues you care about and you have brought a bill and it has a fiscal note, you have $400 million to consider. You can bring a bill that has a fiscal note. And if you are compelling enough to 48 other senators, then that bill can pass. And if it has a fiscal note, then it's part of our budget at the end of the day. And as an appropriations committee, instead of all of us saying, well, we're going to fund this exactly how we want to fund it, we said, no, what we will do is we will leave this for the floor in terms of general funds. We will leave $400 million for the floor for this legislature to determine and prioritize what they want to utilize those dollars for. So I want to remind you again, in the morning, when you come and look at your agenda, look at that green sheet. Because every time we pass legislation that has a general fund impact, it will impact this green sheet. And you'll have less money on the general fund to spend. And that's the next couple of weeks, that's the negotiations we have to have in terms of money. And my hope and my call to this legislature is that we make them wisely for the future fiscal prosperity of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, I'm back to the equation that CJI created, that the maximum is if you look at admissions plus time served, that constitutes the Nebraska Department of Corrections Systems population. So pre-COVID, the minimum sentence was up 25%. 25%. If you look at the minimum and maximum, we've already talked quite a bit about determinate and indeterminate sentences. But no matter what, pre-COVID, that minimum sentence was up 25%. So our goal is to just put people in prison, keep them there longer, and that's fine if that's what people want to do, but that's not necessarily the most dangerous people. We know that a large portion of the people in prison are people with property issues or small drug issues. So what we have to look at is the proportion of the maximum sentence longer than 5 years has gone up. And the minimum sentence for drug offenses is greater than the minimum sentence for person offenses, offenses against people. Why would that be? The minimum sentence for drug offenses, Nebraskans, is greater than the minimum sentence for person offenses. So are we arresting the people we're scared of? People that commit crimes against the person? Or are we arresting the people we're most mad at, the drug offenders? Again, we need to look at the mandatory minimums. Those people sentenced with a mandatory minimum are not eligible for probation. There's no good time earned for a mandatory minimum sentence, for any part of the mandatory minimum sentence. So again, if we want to continue to have mandatory minimum sentences, indeterminate sentences, the stacking of sentences, that's our choice. But then taxpayers, we're just going to keep building and charging you for new prisons. Rather than getting smart on crime, we're lazy on crime. That's what we're doing right now. I think it's lazy to continue to build a new prison without addressing the sentencing reform and the programming within our prisons. It's a lot easier to continue to build than to look at what the issue is, what the underlying problem is. And the underlying problem continues to be these sentences that are mandatory minimums, the sentences that are indeterminate sentences and determinate sentences, and the sentences that where we continue to stack rather than allowing them to serve time at the same time. So the mandatory minimum admissions have more than doubled. We know that to be true. That was something that came from CSI since 2011.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So and there's a large variation in the use of mandatory minimums within counties. These are issues that are costing the taxpayers money. And the problem is that many people on the floor don't want to try to wrap their heads around these laws. Many people on the floor think it's just easier, build a prison and we don't have to deal with the underlying issues, like making sure that people are released so that they have supervision, so that at their parole eligibility date, they're able to have had enough programming to be safe enough to go out in the community. Instead, we keep them in, we give them maybe a little bit of programming their last year or offer it, and then they say, no thanks, because we don't want any post-release supervision. So they jam out. This
Time,
is
Senator.
not smart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Walsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Well, thank you, Senator Walls. Colleagues, when I was last on the mic, we were talking about the effect or the absence of any effect on public safety in those states that have done justice reinvestment. And I I feel a little bit like I'm shadow boxing because I don't really have anybody who's saying these are bad ideas. Nobody's standing up to say this doesn't work or it will sacrifice public safety. So in some sense, I'm anticipating arguments that people will say or make, and that's fine. I'm happy to do it. But one of the things that we heard when bills were introduced on this topic was, well, crime rates will skyrocket. You'll have problems. Look at what's happening here and look at what's happening there. In fact, we aren't adversely affecting public safety, and we will improve public safety. You know, for a generation, politicians were elected talking about being tough on crime. And of course, you were either tough on crime or you were soft on crime. And to be soft on crime meant that you had some notion that sentences didn't need to be as long. Perhaps you wanted to get rid of something, but people would get slapped with that label, and the champions of tough on crime would talk about it throughout a campaign and then go to their legislatures and to the Congress and pass laws that made sentences worse, longer mandatory minimums and the like. And that's exactly why we find ourselves where we're at today. The justice reinvestment initiatives that conservative states have done, recognize there's a way to get more bang for your taxpayer dollar in another way, and it's called smart on crime. And when we brought CJI in, we were talking about smart on crime. We were talking about what do we need to do to stop the growth in the prison population and address overcrowding. And that is smart on crime. We've been through this process, a data-driven process, colleagues, and the options that have come out of this have come from Nebraskans. CJI did not come to Nebraska with a list of things that they're trying to shoehorn into our criminal code. These are ideas that came out of the working group. Now, some of them were embraced by the entire working group and some of them were not, but all of them have data to support them. All of them have data to support them, and it saves money, it improves public safety, it resolves the overcrowding emergency in time, and it doesn't sacrifice public safety. I hope you will take a moment to look at this handout that I provided you, or both of them, because we are in a crisis. You know, I tried cases for many years. I've been a trial lawyer for 40 years, and I've been in front of judges, and I've been in front of juries, and once in a while—
1 minute.
This may come as a surprise to you. Once in a while, somebody will fall asleep during one of my trials. And whenever that happens, I speak up a little louder so people wake up. It's kind of weird when that happens, and you look over and one of your jurors is dozing off, or the judge is dozing off after lunch, and I have to speak up, and now I feel like I need to yell about this stuff because my jurors are falling asleep. And I realize I've been talking about this for a long time, colleagues, but there is a problem, a solution, there is money to be saved, and better outcomes to be achieved. I look forward to the next time on the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, a priority motion. Senator Wayne would move to recommit LB 1013 to the Appropriations Committee.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on your recommit motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask some members from the appropriation a real basic question. So I'll start with Wishart, followed by Vargas, followed by McDonald, and then we'll just work through appropriations. And it's a really, really basic question. The question is, according to my calculations, we had 1.1 in ARPA, 1.04 in ARPA. We had roughly $725 million extra in general funds, and we had another, we'll just call it 1.7 billion between cash and ARPA, not including general funds, but if we include general funds, it's a little more than that. It's almost 2 billion, according to the budget report. So my question, will Senator Wishart yield to a question? I'll give her time to come over. Will Senator Vargas yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, will you yield?
We'll start with Senator Vargas while she has time to walk over.
Senator Vargas, will you yield?
Yes. So out of the $1.85 billion of, we'll call extra revenue, do you feel that North Omaha receiving a guaranteed of $110 million is fair and equitable? And I want to couch that with the racial lens and a historical lens of redlining 75, Highway 75 and discrimination.
110 million is what we put in. There is more that we can and should do.
Senator Vargas, I asked a simple question, which is, do you feel that that is fair based off of the appropriations recommendations? Do you feel that is fair and equitable?
The appropriations recommendations, just like every other committee, is a very iterative process. I don't think many of the conversations we have on every issue is fair and equitable. We're trying to debate a lot of different things. We have to get to a way where we get 5 votes in committee.
I understand that, Senator. I'm not talking about your committee. I'm talking about you personally. You as Senator Vargas, do you feel that's fair and equitable?
I think we need to do more to make it more equitable for every single community right now, which includes North and South Omaha.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Wishart.
Senator Wishart, will you yield?
Yes.
Again, the question is based in the historical context of Highway 75 discrimination. Now we can add prison justice reform in the recent articles. Out of the $1.8 billion of extra dollars we have, do you feel 110 million guaranteed to North Omaha is equitable and fair?
I don't think it's fair to be spending 500 million on a prison and not investing in the communities in which a lot of people are incarcerated and coming out of those communities incarcerated. So
Not
no.
to be difficult, the question is the appropriation amount of $110 million that the appropriators put out.
Okay.
Do you feel that is fair and equitable? Only 110 million out of 1.8 billion going to North Omaha.
I think what the committee did in terms of ARPA is incredibly fair and equitable.
Thank you. Senator McDonald.
Senator McDonald, will you yield?
Yes, I'll
Do I need to repeat the question or you got the gist of it?
I got the gist of it. So the 210 million that we set aside, roughly 20% of the ARPA funds for qualified census tracts, I don't believe we can look at pain and suffering only in our own districts, like, for example, mine's South Omaha. I think we have to look throughout the state of Nebraska and say, okay, what people have suffered throughout the state. Therefore, the 210 million can go to anyone with any ideas for the qualified census tracts to try to offset that pain and suffering.
So you believe 110 is fair and equitable?
It's 200. It's actually 200.
No, it's not, Senator. If you read the actual language of the bill, it's only a minimum of 50 million to North Omaha. There is a $60 million to a site and building fund that is in a qualified census tract. So technically, that's not even the only thing really guaranteed is 50. But I'm giving the Appropriations Committee the extra 60. That's only 110 million to North Omaha.
But if you look at page 1, Senator Wayne, page 1 of the handout, based on the distribution of the coronavirus state fiscal, we are looking at 20% for qualified census tracts throughout the state of Nebraska at $210 million, which is 20.4% of our.
That is correct, but that's not the question I asked. The question is North Omaha, and North Omaha is only slated to have 50 million plus a potential of 60 million. So my question is really directly, out of the 1.8 billion, is a guaranteed 110 million fair and equitable, understanding the historical issues that North Omaha has faced, including redlining, Highway 75, and discrimination?
Yeah, I agree with the 210 million for the qualified census tracts throughout the state of Nebraska based on the pain and suffering. I don't think pain and suffering is only in one area of our state.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Colleagues, that is 100% the issue. We're afraid to have a conversation about the most discriminated area in Nebraska. We're afraid to just look at what the data is telling us about East Omaha, particularly North Omaha, and we want to couch it in the terms of 210 million. It's not. That's not what the bill says. And to say that is fair and equitable is fundamentally wrong. To say that out of 1.8 billion is fine, is equitable, is fair, is wrong. Fundamentally wrong. And here's what's really happening. I'm no longer talking to the body. I'm talking to anybody who's listening. Here's what's really going on. What's really going on is the budget is tied up. The budget will not have any amendments to it. It's tied up. So Senator Lathrop and Senator Stenner are going to get the budget they want, because nobody here is going to stand up and say, out of the $513 million in cash transferred, zero goes to Omaha or Lincoln. That can't be changed unless it's through an A bill. So they'll get the budget they want. But at the end of the day, we're really not talking about criminal justice reform, because there are bills that go farther than what's on the floor. We're really not talking about changing the conditions that continue to produce the crime that we keep seeing, because we're not making an investment in there. We're investing in water, lakes. What you heard today from 3 appropriation committee people is that the $60 million in cash transfer to Offutt Air Force Base and their project, of which most Nebraskans can't get on and participate or even benefit from, is fair. 60 million, 110 million to the hardest hit area. This budget and this ARPA budget has the rich and wealthy in Nebraska praising us. And we're okay with that. I heard everybody quietly talking about how judiciary did not IPP the abortion bills. And there were a lot of people who were offended by that. Understandably. That's how offended I am by this budget. That's how offended I am by this ARPA proposal. And nobody can tell me different. This is not a philosophical debate. The language is in the bill. Where the money is going. Qualified census tracts, section 31 or 37. 37. 50 million, 50 million, 50 million. That's all that's guaranteed. And you know what's interesting, Senator McKinney? The chamber project gets funded. Not really a North Omaha project in the sense of we came up with it from the community. We went back to the chamber and said, here goes an old project. They're the ones carrying it.
1 minute.
What the community asked for is not funded in here at all. And nobody can point it out differently. I will go word for word the rest of the day with anybody on appropriations that tells me this is a fair budget and tells me North Omaha is getting more. Because when you put $40 million into the middle income housing, that can all go to Lincoln. North Omaha just shares in it, and it's up to DED where that goes. You look at actually what's appropriated directly, line by line from Omaha to Lincoln, to the rest of the state, this budget and ARPA leaves Lincoln and Omaha behind. But what's the worst part about it, Senator McKinney? It kills our community the rest of the way. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Senator Kavanaugh, thank you for the time. So I have been in a little bit of a closing argument on this notion of criminal justice reform, the work of CJI, and getting to the facts with respect to the issue, the solution, and the effect of the solution. And I learned in law school, in trial practice, that sometimes people need to hear things more than once before it sinks in. Usually it's 3 times. And so a good lawyer is going to figure out how to say things 3 different times and not sound like they're repeating themselves. I think I've done that and gone past that quota. But at the risk of sounding and saying the same thing over, I want to be clear. As we approach the end of this debate with some 20 minutes left or 30 minutes left, that we have a problem. We have an overcrowding problem, and building more beds does not solve that problem. You can either accept that we need to do reforms or tell me what your solution is to stop the overcrowding, or prepare to spend and build 3 times the proposed Department of Corrections expansion. You can't stick your head in the sand on this one. You can't. And no one can stand up and say, this sacrifices public safety, because the data doesn't show that. No one can say it doesn't solve a problem, because the data shows that it does. All we're going to do is choose between solving a problem where we have better outcomes and save money, or deny it, kick the can down the road as we have done for 2 administrations, and leave it for somebody else to build more capacity. On the agenda is a tax cut bill that will be taken up. I think it's on select file. I know this is the subject of a lot of work that's going on while this debate has been happening. Senator Linehan's chuckling. I assume that may be an understatement. It's an understatement. A lot of work has gone on that. You know, if we're going to be fiscally responsible, you want this property tax relief, you want these income tax cuts, you want corporate tax cuts, you need to be responsible when it comes to something that is going to be so obviously expensive to the state. It's not only obviously expensive to the state, the status quo isn't getting us there, colleagues. The status quo isn't getting us there. We are, the next time I get up, I want to talk about the status quo. I want to talk about where we're at right now and why we're so proud of what we're doing, because it's not working. It's not working. The status quo is not working.
1 minute.
You can have a reform backed by data that has better outcomes, or you can choose the status quo. I'm going to talk about the status quo because I've been in that committee listening to hearings along with my colleagues, and I'm telling you the status quo doesn't work. We have nothing to be proud of right now. Besides the overcrowding, we continue to have staffing issues. And even if we opened this place, we couldn't staff it. How much more time do I have?
24 seconds.
We have spent $150 million growing our capacity. At $150 million over the last 8 years, we haven't made a difference in the population growth. The gap remains. This isn't going to work.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know what's interesting about this whole thing is I had an IPP motion up beginning of this before we started on this, and that was the first time that somebody wouldn't yield me time, that they want to get involved. It's just interesting how when it's time to be uncomfortable, people disappear. Nobody can tell me, for the next 2 years, nobody's going to be able to get up and talk about historical redlining when we're only directing essentially $50 million to North Omaha. Nobody's going to get to talk about racial and discrimination, hell, for that matter, criminal justice reform and the racial impact when we're only directing $50 million. Because what it essentially comes down to, just like we do in every committee, whether it's dollars or cents, or we're just talking about a bill, we weigh this bill versus another bill, especially when you start talking about how you're going to put bills together. And appropriations is no different. It's money versus this. So if there is a pot of money and you got to divide that up, you are essentially saying out of the $500 million in cash transfers, North Omaha can be left out. Lincoln can be left out. The rest of Omaha can be left out. Being on appropriations, you cannot run from the fact you pick winners and losers. That's the very nature of appropriation in dollars. You're either going to fund something or not. And then we as a body, we pick winner or losers. Either we're going to do tax credits or we're not. We're going to pass a bill to help Nebraska build the rail lines or we're not. All I've said for 5 years is equal treatment. Whatever's good for rural is good for North Omaha. I don't pretend to know South Omaha. I just know the infrastructure is different and the history is completely different. But whatever is good for rural Nebraska is good for North Omaha. Said that for the last 5 years. But nothing can change the fact of where we're at in this budget. There's a bill after this that can help tremendously. Bill asks for a cash transfer. I don't care if it comes from cash, general funds. I don't care if it comes from a check that Senator Hilger, Speaker Hilger wants to write. It doesn't bother me where the money comes from. I'm just saying there has to be a commitment by this body to change something. And by saying qualified census tracts across the state get the same amount of dollars up to, and they say we get a threshold of a minimum of 50 million, says that Hastings has the same historical problem that North Omaha has. That Lincoln's qualified census tracts dealt with riots and beatings and police brutality and 2 lynchings. The Omaha World Herald article looked at all the census tracts across the state of Nebraska. It was Omaha that has anywhere from 16, North Omaha in particular, anywhere from 16 to 20% of African-American males at that particular time in jail. But we're going to treat them the same. But come on the floor, find 25 votes. But Western Nebraska only had to find 5. Laramie Water Project only needed 5. But North Omaha has to come to the floor and find 25. Over 120,000 people. You want to start comparing census tracts and population? We aren't getting our fair share. If you add in South Omaha, over 280,000 people. But $60 million to Offutt Air Force Base, who has 3,000 people living on it. By the way, they leave every 3 years, about over 80% of them. That's just a natural rotation of the Air Force. They're not committed to Nebraska as people, they are as an institution. But we're going to spend $60 million there. $8.5 million for the 20 people to walk up and down the trail.
Time, Senator.
Thank you. I would withdraw my motion, Mr. President.
So ordered. Returning to the queue, Senator Moorfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield my time to Senator Wishart.
Senator Lathrop, 451. I'm sorry, Senator Wishart.
Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, colleagues, I was not planning on speaking again, but since I was personally asked to defend the committee on the floor, I wanted to set the record straight. First of all, if you look through this ARPA budget here, the one community in Nebraska that does substantially better than any other individual census tract in the state is North Omaha. And I do want to correct the record. $60 million are going to an airport development project, which was brought in the bill before us. And we supported. It's a great idea. What we were told by Senator McKinney and Senator Wayne and the chief of police was that if we make specific investments in North Omaha in particular, that is better than any additional police officers in that community. So we said, you know what, as a committee, and by the way, colleagues, this was my #1 priority when we scored. I'm a Lincoln senator, and I live in an area with a lot of poverty. I went to deliver my neighbor's Christmas cookies, and one of my neighbors was evicted and had a warrant out on Christmas, okay? There's needs across the state. But what Senator Wayne brought was compelling. So we put $60 million, I want to be clear, $60 million into an airport project in North Omaha. Not $50 million, $60 million. Yes, we said for qualified census tracts, our committee is going to propose $150 million across the state, with at least $40 million going to North Omaha and at least $40 million going to South Omaha. The rest of the state, you've got a $70 million pot to deal with. If Senator Wayne and anyone else wants to bring an amendment and take all of that for one specific area of the state, and it's compelling enough about that argument, it's up to this body to make that decision. That was the fair recommendation our Appropriations Committee made. Again, if you look at this ARPA budget, the one community that gets more direct targeted funding than any other community in the state is North Omaha. Is it everything Senator Wayne wanted? No. Lincoln is staring into the future in 10 years of not having another water source. And there was a bill to ask for $20 million for Lincoln Water, $200 million for Lincoln Water. We have an $800 million need, and we got $20 million, okay? Am I happy with that? No, but I'm one member on Appropriations Committee. $4 billion worth of ask, colleagues, $1.4 billion to spend. Secondly, I want to go back to the budget and correct the record. First of all, when you look at a budget, you can't just look at one type of funding source. You have to look at the broad picture of what we funded. Some things are cash funded, some things are general funded. What we're bringing before you is a package. But I'll go to the cash reserve funds and cash transfers, because it was said that only $20 million is going to Lincoln and Omaha. That is not correct. First of all, the $20 million going to middle income housing. $20 million going to Exarban, intern Nebraska, for intern Nebraska. $8.3 million going to trail development. That's for Lincoln and Omaha. It's not for the rest of the state. $25 million going to the Innovation Fund for Agriculture at the City of Lincoln campus. There's a significant amount of money going to Lincoln and Omaha in this budget. And I'll mind you, out of general funds, we're giving $90 million to provider rates to support some of the most vulnerable community members in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you, President Hughes. I wanted to make sure to weigh in here. Look, there's many things here. As you know, Senator Wishart mentioned many of them as well. But I support what Senator Wayne's trying to do. I support what Senator McKinney's trying to do. I support the bill that's coming up next. And if there's a vote to bring over $225 million from cash reserves or general funds or move it, I'm on board 100%. So that's just the clarity piece of, I support the efforts and what's trying to happen, and I support the rationale behind it. So let's just make that part clear. In terms of the appropriations process, which this is important, and I think Senator Wishart did mention this, look, we're going to have a debate on ARPA. This is just a very high-level thing. There's $60 million that's going to go directly to North Omaha for this airport park. It's not going to anything else. It's going for that reason. We were compelled by it. We all had to rank what our priorities were. The original North Omaha Recovery Grant was my number one, just like Senator Wishart. Actually, I think that was a conversation we had. How much can we be able to line item directly as much as possible and make sure that we're investing in existing projects? That's the reason why we put the $60 million in there. It's the reason why we put the $50 million for North Omaha. That's the reason why we also did into affordable middle income housing. And just for the record, the middle income workforce housing program that's been around for about 2 years, and its first round of grants, $6 million went out, and $5 million of those dollars from the first time that this went out went directly to East Omaha. It's the reason why we put in this program. And of that went directly to East Omaha, the overwhelming majority of that $5 million went to North Omaha. So putting money into the middle income workforce housing is also putting money into North Omaha, because those are the entities that have been the most successful and where the most opportunity is. So that's the reason why we put in middle income workforce housing. We put it into something that we know had been working. Historically with ARPA, we've been trying to put things into things that have been working. So that's the rationale behind it. So if historically 80% of it went to North Omaha in the last round, that's the reason why we put it in there, because we're expecting that about 80% of it's going to go, of the $60 million in middle income workforce housing, is going to also go to North Omaha. It was the intent. That's the goal. That's why we put it in there too. That's one of the reasons I supported that as well. I want that just to be clear, because in as much as I'm going to support the bill next time and also support any votes that would get more funds to North and South Omaha and the East Side recovery, and that's also what's in the amendment right now on the bill, I also want to make it clear that in the ARPA, we put in funds that were either directly line itemed or available over so many other priorities, $3 billion of other priorities. That's a clear message that this matters and is important, and we can and should do more. And it's why I said that we can and should do more. It's not an absolute on whether or not one thing is fair and equitable. It's, we're not done yet in this process. The whole process can be more fair and equitable. And that's why I'm going to fight along for the next bill to make sure we can do more. If we don't get it from cash reserve, I'll bring an amendment so we bring it from the general funds. And many of the things that were brought up as items that we would spend money on, I didn't vote for those things in committee. I didn't vote for many of the water projects in committee. I didn't think they were necessarily a good resource or use of our funds or the canal, quite honestly.
1 minute.
So I'm saying that because when we're talking about what we're trying to do here, it's not easy to fully generalize just on what we did and did not do in appropriations. It's fair for everyone to judge it, and everybody's entitled to that. And that's the debate we'll have. But when you look at the details of what's in here, we're not done yet. And I'll be supporting to do more. But this is exactly what the intention of the iterative process of appropriations in our ARPA committee is, that there's nearly $3 billion of individuals that got nothing. And there's about $1 billion of funds where we were able to direct it into the right things: provider rates, public health, child welfare, making sure we're investing in healthcare professionals, workforce development, affordable housing. I mean, and the list goes on. And so we will have obviously that debate, but I just wanted to make it clear that there's a sizable investment when we're talking about both the East Side and many things that I think are going to impact North Omaha, because these programs have historically
That's time,
benefited those
Senator.
areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator McKinney, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank
Senator
you.
Wayne,
Yes.
455.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator McKinney. Colleagues, this is a great move by the appropriations to have Senator Wishart defend the budget because they think we're going to go lighter, and we're not. We can stand up, Senator Vargas, and say $60 million is going to the airport that creates jobs in one of the hardest hit areas is great out of ARPA funds. But colleagues and people watching, ARPA is supposed to go to the hardest hit areas. That was North Omaha. We have recessions. We have unemployment that we haven't seen since 2008 during the recession and still haven't recovered. ARPA was intended to do that to hardest hit areas. So don't feel like you're giving me something when the feds are telling us to use it in the hardest hit areas. Second, you don't get a pass when you say $60 million, Senator Wishart, and say we're investing in North Omaha. We're spending 80 on a lake. We're spending $30 million in North Platte on a rail project. We're spending $20 million in Fremont on a rail project. We're spending $50 million in Ogallala on a lake. That's equitable? 60 million that's going to create jobs for a community that's been left behind, but 50 million for a lake, 80 million for another lake, that's equitable. And you're defending that. That's no longer defensible. We can talk about pots of money all we want, but at the end of the day, cash is cash, and I have said clear, and I think Senator McKinney has said over and over, we don't care where the money comes from. But there is a number. And the actual feasibility analysis that was done for North Omaha to actually do what we're supposed to do is around 1.8 billion. That's an actual number. That's an actual report. We're only asking for 450. And it's hard to see a justification, an argument, when we're putting 53 million in for a potential canal. A potential canal that we're putting 25 million into a university agricultural innovation campus, of which the feds have not even gave the money yet, that we're supposed to match. 25 million. But I'm supposed to feel good that 110,000 people, 130,000 people in North Omaha are getting 50? I'm supposed to celebrate that? I'm supposed to go back to my community and say out of the 1.8, hey, I know some ag thing that's not even been created or the feds haven't even gave the money. They got 25 because it's a good plan, although none of us have seen it. Hey, we're gonna spend 53 on a potential canal that we don't know actually whether or not it's gonna be there, but we're gonna spend 53. We're gonna help irrigation water districts to a tune of 50 million. But hey, North Omaha, you got 50. I understand you have some of the highest incarceration rates. I understand you have some of the lowest, the biggest achievement gaps. I understand all that. But we're going to give you pretty much the same amount that we're going to give Offutt. Military base for parks, water and golf course, a track and field, a track. We're giving 25 million out of a cash transfer, but I'm supposed to celebrate that North Omaha is getting 50. Little Negro, you should be happy you getting anything. That's what Senator Chambers would have said. And now I know why he feels that way. I've played by your rules this entire session. I try to have multiple meetings with Stenner, Hilgers, all the time. I only had one. The rules are off. Not a threat, not anything. I don't know what else to do. I'm clueless. That we're saying 50 million and 60 million, 110 guaranteed is equitable when we're spending 80 on water, on a lake, 25 on a golf course. You want to defend that? Don't come to my community and say it, because they'll call BS on that all day. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart is next in the queue, but she's used her 3 opportunities. So Senator McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to discuss the process a little bit, I appreciate that the governor brought us a proposed ARPA budget. That's something that he didn't have to do, but he said he's going to approach it the same way that he approaches the normal budget process. So as appropriations, we started off with that. We had 130 issues to deal with at the beginning, looking at the governor's proposed ARPA budget, working off that. Then we had people start coming in and testifying. Of course, the senators bringing their ideas and thoughts and concerns. And the reason I say that through this process is because I've been proud of the Appropriations Committee based on this. Of course, everyone has their legislative district they're from. But also, there's always been the direction from the Appropriations Committee that we are state senators, that we have to look east, west, north, south in this state and try to help all the citizens if we can at that moment in time. But it was stated earlier about, do we have to pick and choose? Yes, we do. We have to pick and choose. We try to do that in a fair way. We try to take all the information, again, after 120 hours of testimony. And I'm just talking about the ARPA this year. I'm not talking about just the normal budget process, the time we put in. And that's our jobs. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to be on appropriations, and we wanted to do the work. So we are doing the work. But the idea of not being fair has never been the intent of the Appropriations Committee. And if you look at qualified census tracts and the idea of what the language that was put in the ARPA directions for this and what we're trying to do with the ARPA bill is, you cannot talk about pain and suffering just in one area. You can't do that. And as senator, I could say just in Legislative District 5 and South Omaha, the pain and suffering is just enough to where I want X. And I do. I do want X for that pain and suffering. But also, at no time will I not look at the whole state. North Omaha, South Omaha, the whole state. And if you look at the breakdown of that qualified census tracts and just those dollars, and looking at the total 210 million, which I believe Senator Wishart did a good job breaking that down, the 60 million we're talking about, but then look at 40 million for North Omaha, 40 million for South Omaha, then 70 million for the remainder of the states for the qualified census tracts. If you look at that and the fairness in that, now could that possibly shift? Yes, because of basically the idea of the need and those qualified census tracts. But the fairness of it, I don't think anyone can disagree from the appropriations point of view, is that we were trying to look at the whole state, east, west, north, south, and look at the pain and suffering of the state and trying to relieve that through our proposed ARPA bill. Not that it's going to be perfect, it's not. We're not perfect as appropriators. We never will be, but I believe our goal of being fair and having those long discussions and those hearings, we did fulfill our job on that part. And I appreciate what the governor brought to us, which we changed quite a bit of what his thoughts were on the ARPA budget. And now this is the process for this body to consider what we've done. But I do want to stand up for the Appropriations Committee and on the idea of fairness and trying to do what was best for the state as a whole. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 1 minute, 10 seconds.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator McDonald. I want to, I think we're going to take a cloture vote after this or after one more speaker. It's close. I just want to, first of all, thank you for your attention to my comments over the last 3 days. This is an important issue facing the state. These amendments and the work that I've done speaking is not intended to disrupt this bill. I would encourage you to support the cloture motion, and you may, of course, vote against FA 80, and let's move 1013 on to select file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Stinner would move to invoke cloture pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
It is the ruling of the chair that there has been full and fair debate afforded to LB 1013. Senator Stinner, for what purpose do you rise?
I would like a call of the House and a roll call in reverse order, please.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
29 ayes, 2 nays to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Wayne, Senator Moorfield, Senator Breezy, please check in. Senator Merman, Senator Bostoman, Senator Clements, Senator Ben Hansen. Senator Stinner, we're still missing Senator Wayne. Do you wish to wait or proceed? All members are present. Colleagues, the first vote is a motion to invoke cloture. There's been a request for a roll call vote in reverse order. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Wishart, voting yes. Senator Williams, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting no. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Stinner, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Pansing Brooks, voting yes. Senator Pauls, Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Moorfield, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting no. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McAllister, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lindstrom, voting yes. Senator Lathrop, Voting yes, Senator Coulterman. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Hughes. Not voting, Senator Hilkeman. Voting yes, Senator Hilgers. Voting yes, Senator Matt Hansen. Not voting, Senator Ben Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Gregert. Voting yes, Senator Geist. Voting yes, Senator Friesen. Voting no, Senator Flood. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Vote is 39 ayes, 4 nays, 4 present not voting, Mr. President.
Record, Mr. Clerk. The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. Members, the next vote is the adoption of FA 80. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
3 ayes, 37 nays on the adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. Colleagues, the next vote is the adoption of AM 2001. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 ayes, 3 nays on the committee adoption of the committee amendments.
AM 2001 is adopted. Members, the final vote will be the advancement of LB 1013 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, 4 nays on advancement of the bill.
The bill is advanced to ENR initial. Mr. Clerk, for items, I raise the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion from Senator Wayne to place LB 334 on general file pursuant to Rule 3, Section 20B. That'll be laid over. Amendments to be printed. Senator Lathrop to LB 920. Senator Breezy to LB 939. Senator Brandt to LB 1014. And Senator Wayne to LB 1014. Notice the corrected committee hearing from the Health and Human Services Committee. Motion from Senator Kavanaugh to be printed, bracketing LB 939. New A bill, Senator Arch, LB 752A. Bill relating to appropriations, appropriates funds to aid in the carrying out of the provisions of Legislative Bill 752. That'll be placed on general file. Additionally, Legislative Bill 1024A from Senator Wayne. That'll be placed on general file. LR 344 from Senator Merman. That'll be laid over. And Legislative Resolution 345 from Senator Lowe. That'll be laid over as well. Finally, Mr. President, a priority motion. Senator Erdman would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m. 1:00 p.m.
Colleagues, you've all heard the motion to recess until 1 o'clock. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? We are in recess till 1 o'clock.